Liber feudorum maior, originally called the Liber domini regis, is a late 12th century illuminated cartulary of the Crown of Aragon. It was compiled by the royal archivist Ramon de Caldes with the help of Guillem de Bassa for Alfonso II, beginning in 1192. It contained 902 documents dating as far back as the 10th century. It is profusely illustrated in a Romanesque style, a rarity for utilitarian documents. The LFM is an indispensable source for the institutional history of the emerging Principality of Catalonia. It is preserved as a file in the Archives de la Corona de Aragon, Cancilleria Real Registers No. 1 in Barcelona. Manuscript history. Only 114 of the original 888 folios of the LFM remain, but only 93 of the original 902 documents have been completely lost, and thus so near complete reconstruction of its contents remains possible. The prologue to the document, written by Ramon de Caldes, describes the work as being in duo volumina, but its present division dates only from its rebinding in the 19th century. Whether the planned second volume was ever bound or even begun cannot be known. The original volumes sustained damage during the French Revolution and the French invasion of Spain, but their indices survive, as well as most of the parchment charters that were copied in the Liber. Its modern editor, Francisco Miquel Rosell, has reconstructed the order and rubrics of the documents. The folios were trimmed, however, eliminating any evidence of their earlier physical states. Two smaller books of fiefs related to the LFM project are also preserved. The Liber feudorum Cerretanii concentrates on Cerdagne and Roussillon and may represent a failed initiative to create regional cartularies model on the LFM. The Liber feudorum Formae Minoris is a continuation of the LFM, including documents from the early 13th century. Only two other secular cartularies survive from the same period: the Liber Instrumentorum Memorialium of the Lords of Montpellier and the Liber Instrumentorum Viscomitalium of the Trencavals. Compilation. Dating. The compilation of the LFM was probably related to Alfonso's renewed drive to control the castellans of his domains. In 1178–80 he launched a series of lawsuits for power of access to various castles. The LFM was the product of intense research into the archives of the Crown in support of its claims. From 1171 to 1177 a review of the Commodal archives was found necessarily for asserting the Alfonso's rights in the county of Carcassonne, which may have inspired archival reform. In 1178, 144 Commodal charters that had hitherto been in the hands of Ramon de Gironella, the Count's vicar in Girona, were handed over to Guillem de Bassa. Many of these later appeared in the LFM, accepting the prologue at face value. Francisco Miquel Rosell assumed that the work was presented to Alfonso II and that it was therefore completed before the Count's death in 1196. Thomas Bisson has argued that the work was presented to Alfonso complete in August 1194 at the same ceremony where Ponce III de Cabrera came to terms with the king. Since Ramon de Caldes's work on the LFM is last recorded in April that year, it is assumed that he pushed himself to complete the work in the following months. A third line of argument pursued by Anscari Mundo sees the LFM as complete by 1192, when the latest of its charters was issued. 3 charters from the final 4 years of Alfonso's reign are contained in the LFM, but in a hand distinct from that of its 2 main scribes. All of these pertain to Ponce de Cabrera, his capitulation and his oath of fealty to Peter II in April 1196. Since the last document would have been added only after Alfonso's death, it is possible that the others were added simultaneously, that the completion of the cartulary was unrelated to Ponce's settlement, and that the work was in the main finished by 1192. Since documents of an earlier date than November 1192 appear to have been inscribed on blank folios after documents from that year, it is probable that 1192 represents the finished date of the original version. It is also possible that the work that had begun as early as 1178 was renewed sometime around 1190 to 94. Bison connects any renewed effort on the part of Ramon de Caldes before his retirement from court in late 1194 with a series of challenges to the authority of Alfonso II. In February 1194, Berenguer, Archbishop of Tarragona, was assassinated by Guillem Ramon II de Montcada, which to Bison indicates the weakness of the peace and truce of God at that time and since 1190, when the baronage had first rejected it. According to Lawrence McCrank, the LFM was unfinished at the king's death in 1196 and at Ramon's in 1199. The prologue was written in anticipation and a second volume was never begun, only planned. Both Bison and Adam Costo agree that the work was completed in 1192 and presented in 1194, but that it was never completed. Rather, the closing of the selection of instruments was the beginning of continuous work. Purpose: the LFM was treated by its modern editor, Rosell, as little more than a written record of the aggrandizement of the domain of the Counts of Barcelona. Lawrence McCrank connected the beginnings of the cartulary enterprise with the Treaty of Cazorla in 1179, by which Alfonso secured recognition of his rights to Valencia by Alfonso VIII of Castile. On this view, Alfonso slowed the reconquest in order to concentrate on unifying his various realms into a single crown. Critiquing this view, Costo points out that, while papal bulls and treaties with the military orders regarding Aragon are found at the start of the cartulary, the relative dearth of charters relating to castle holding and land holding in Aragon suggests that the unification of Aragon and Catalonia, juridically, was not high on the minds of the compilers of the Patron. The LFM introduced no new principles of feudal organization, but it does represent a more abstract notion of comital and royal power. It has been compared to the usages de Barcelona as a failure in practical or bureaucratic terms. It is essentially an expression of power, conceived territorially and principally with regards to Catalonia. The cartulary is not a record of the union of Catalonia with Aragon. Rather, it is a record of a vast new authority including Aragon, parts of Occitania, and all the Catalan counties, including Osona, Barcelona, Besalú, Cerdaña, Girona, Roussillon, and Palas Jussa, which were all possessed by Alfonso II, as well as the Emperies and Urgel, which were not. Bison writes that in the LFM, feudal principles, applied to serve administrative needs, remained subordinated to a conception of territorial sovereignty. Yet he also says that the LFM was exclusively a land book concerned with proprietary or reversionary right, concerned with any systematic effort to strengthen suzerain rights of vassalic obligations. Costo, to an extent, disagrees, arguing that the work is a combination of land book and casebook, in which some charters are presented to explain the proper working of the feudal system. The rubrics and section headings are evidence of the ambiguity of Alfonso's position and that of the various regions. While Aragon is termed a regnum, Cerdaña and Roussillon are comitati, Tarragona is listed as a civitas, and Provence and the county of Melguil are not described. In other cases, charters are named for the lord that issued them or confirmed them. Contents. Text. The documents in the LFM are organized by county, viscounty, or lineage. Sometimes sections are indicated by rubrics. Sections and subsections were separated by blank folios, which Rosell thought were intended for earlier documents that were yet to be retrieved, but which others suggested were intended for expansion. In fact, both new documents and earlier ones were added to blank folios. Within a given subsection, the documents are usually ordered chronologically, and sometimes grouped into periods. A comital archive for the Counts of Barcelona is only mentioned for the first time in 1180. Ramon de Caldes refers to omnia instrumenta propria inter vos vestras canticessors ac homines vestros confecta, but the location of these documents is uncertain. The archive may have been centralized yet itinerant, or perhaps there were subsidiary archives at the various comital centers. The archive sent by Ramon de Gironella to Guillem de Bassa contained mostly documents pertaining to the county of Girona. For instance, the copyists of the LFM may have made use of an itinerant commission which collected or copied charters throughout Alfonso's domains, where needed. At least 2 charters in the LFM were definitely from outside sources: a grant by Raymond Berengar IV of Barcelona to Santa Maria de l'Aristany in 1152, and a privilege of Charlemagne held at the monastery of Sant Llorenç del Munt. Further, 109 documents from the archives of the county of Palas Jussa, acquired by Alfonso on 27 May 1192, were incorporated into the LFM almost immediately. Illustration: though it is rare as an example of an illuminated cartulary, the LFM is not the only example from the 12th century, nor even from Spain. In fact, there exist 4 Spanish exemplars from the first half of the century: the Libro de los Testamentos of the Cathedral of Oviedo, Tumbo A from Santiago de Compostela, the Libro de las Estampas of Leon, and the Becero Antiguo of the Monastery of Lier. French examples exist from the same time period as the LFM, from Vierzon, Mont Saint-Michel, and Marchienne. Costa has identified 2 styles and thus 2 hands at work in the miniatures of the LFM, one conservative and local, the other expert and international. Joan Aino dated the painting to the first quarter of the 13th century, but it was probably planned from the start. The LFM preserves 79 images, though there were once more. Many of the images are connected with specific charters in the cartulary and depict various specific actions of feudal politics. They are among the earliest depictions of the act of homage, of the placing of a vassal's hands between those of his lord. Oaths and pledges are depicted by raised right hands and agreements by hand-holding. The Treaty of Zaragoza is depicted by Alfonso II and his Castilian counterpart, Alfonso VIII, as sitting on 2 thrones, holding hands. All these images reinforce the royal conception of power and the subordination of vassals. The first 2 images of the cartulary, however, account to the hierarchical spirit of the rest. In the first, Alfonso and Ramon, seated at equal levels, with a scribe at work in the background, gesture towards a pile of charters, the charters of the center of attention. The king is depicted as working. In the second, the king and the queen, Sancha of Castile, who are surrounded by a circular array of 7 pairs of noble women engaged in conversation. The king and queen, too, appear engaged in conversation. The image is probably a depiction of the court and its culture, which was a home to many troubadours.